Hello and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. Today we look at one of the most pressing realities of our time, climate change and its impact on the world around us. The United States and China, the two largest polluters in the world, have sprung a surprise recently by committing to cutting emissions by a set date drastically. That deal's been questioned by many. Others are asking, what does this mean for India? Does it increase pressure on us to commit to cutting carbon emissions? Does India now need to chart its own path? Prime Minister Modi at the G20 this week has stressed on the need for a global virtual center for clean energy. He's also talked, however, of India's dependence on coal and asked for investment in clean coal technology. India, of course, still largely dependent on coal for its power and gas requirements. And that really is the crux of our problem. How do we balance the need for industrial growth, the whole Make in India manufacturing thrust, with a shift to renewable clean energy? Joining me tonight on this dialogue is the Minister for Environment, Forests and Climate Change, Prakash Javadekar. I'm also joined by Ambassador Shyam Saran, the former envoy for climate change under the UPA government. Sunita Narayan of the Center for Science and Environment, recently, of course, part of the government's Climate Change Council, not in the NDA government's new council just announced. And also with me, Devinder Sharma, who specializes in agriculture and the impact of climate change on our crops. Thank you all very much for joining me on this dialogue. Mr. Javadekar, Suresh Prabhu, before he became Railway Minister, made that statement that India needs to actually has become a victim of bracketing with China, and that India and China need to chart their own path when it comes to focusing on cutting carbon emission levels. He said India has the largest number of poor people, our income levels are lower than China, so we can't be bracketed with China when it comes to being asked to deliver on cutting carbon emissions. We've had Piyush Goyal say recently that India's development imperatives cannot be sacrificed at the altar of potential climate changes many years in the future. Do you support both these statements? Do you feel that given the recent deal between the US and China, India now has to look afresh at its own stand? What's your perspective on that?
Basically, every statement either made by Suresh Prabhu or Piyush Goyal has to be read in a particular context. The issue is this, that India is much poorer than China, then we have more need to grow faster to come to terms or come equal with China. It is nearly fourfold of our pollution China emits. It is fourfold of their income levels, the progress they have made. We have more than Africa put together. We have more population of poor people in our country. We need to develop. Poverty is the biggest environmental disaster. So our priorities are very firm. Our 1/3 of the population has not enough access to energy. So education, health and everything, the real development requires energy access and proper development programs. To that end, our priority will always remain that. And so for us, the equity and CBDR are essential ingredients of any agreement of the world in future also. As far as bracketing with China is concerned, let me make clear that nobody bracketed it with China as we are. US wants to bracket us. That China, emerging economies, China in India, China in India, China in India. This is what EU and US says. We are one on the issue of CBDR and equity. Nobody in India said that we are equal to China. We have not bracketed with China ourselves on that issue. We are on same page as far as our views on differentiated responsibility and equity as a principle. And I think that doesn't change. But that will not change even now.
By China actually doing a separate deal with the US, has China disassociated itself from India? China was a powerful ally for India and the voice of developing countries and arguing against Western pressure. Will India come under more pressure now that China has signed what some Indian experts would call a sweetheart deal?
I don't think this is just a part of INDCs. What China and US has done, in a way they have declared their INDCs. targets, headlines, that yes, China will be tipping at to 2030. That is their INDC, intended naturally determined contribution, because that is what will be coming out by each country, and every country. We are also preparing our own INDCs. We are seriously doing our homework, and we'll be giving it next year anytime. So these are on our own volition. It is not mandated by legally by Kyoto Protocol or any other agreement, and we don't want to take such kind of responsibilities which developed countries need to take, and developing countries have right to grow till they come to a level playing field. And therefore, what we are saying is, they have just flagged off, and America has declared their intention to double reduction in their emissions, what they were targeting or what they say they have actually done. There are many factors. I had just discussion with the American experts who were here and who brokered this China-US deal. So Holden was here and I discussed just last 1 hour with him. So this is what is happening, that all are now putting a posturing. This is more of a posturing. This is not, I don't think that China has completely disassociated with its earlier stand. But every country wants to act, and we are also acting on our own volition. Our Prime Minister yesterday gave more ambitious target of 100,000 megawatts of renewable energy. It's a big target. We were talking of 20,000, 40,000 megawatts. Now he has given us hundreds of thousands of, means 1 lakh megawatt. So that's a bigger target. So we want to walk the clean energy path. Yes. The issue is,
let me just
the issue is, what is the cost, and whether the technology transfer will happen in an affordable manner, or whether there will be IPR and the royalties we will be paying. That is the issue, and that we'll discuss in later stage also.
Ambassador Shamsaran, come in on what we've discussed so far. Your perspective on this.
Insofar as the US-China deal is concerned, number one, I do not think it is such a path-breaking or a very significant breakthrough. Certainly not in terms of what is required. If you look at the recent IPCC report, what is required in terms of dealing with the challenge of climate change, what the US and China have put forward is very far away from that, because China will continue to grow its emissions till 2030. It may be the intensity of that increase will come down, but it will keep on increasing.
The West has termed it as historic. Path-breaking was some of the adjectives used to describe this.
Because it gives them, it takes them off the hook. Because if the United States of America has given a certain target, and if both of them are going to converge at a certain level by 2030 or thereabouts, then we are actually having two of the largest polluters targeting something which is far beyond what is required for dealing with the challenge of climate change. So the responsibilities which the two largest polluters should have in terms of the climate change challenge, this certainly does not achieve that.
They have not taken.
Whatever may be the political impact of this, certainly there is a political impact. Certainly they will try and project that they have actually made a major breakthrough. But I do not think that this really meets the requirement of the emergency, climate change emergency that we are facing. And as far as India is concerned, number one, I think India has a very good story to tell. Its own intensity, energy intensity has been progressively coming down. As the Minister pointed out, we have now a much more ambitious renewable energy target. Even if we are talking about some very important development in terms of China declaring a certain peak year, in 2007, the former Prime Minister of India had already indicated that we will not let our per capita emissions ever go beyond the average per capita emissions of the developed countries. So in a sense, India has already in fact committed itself, maybe not to a year, but it had certainly committed itself to a rather ambitious target. If the West is going to be more ambitious, India will also have to be more ambitious. So I do not think that we should particularly feel pressured by this. It is the nature of negotiations that naturally the other side will try to put pressure on you by saying, oh, look what we have been able to agree with China, and therefore, you know, you must also come up with something. That is a negotiating tactic. There is no reason why India should actually fall prey to that kind of tactics. We should do what we need to do, even if there is not much happening in the multilateral negotiations, because it is in India's interest that we should follow a path of sustainable development. That we should make a long-term shift from our current reliance on fossil fuels to a pattern of economic activity which is progressively based more on renewable sources of energy, on like cleaner sources of energy, like nuclear energy, for example. That is something which is dictated by the very nature of the challenge which we face. 90% of our oil being imported is not energy security. So we need to, from the point of view of energy security as well as climate change, we have to make that shift.
And that really is a policy shift needed. But Sunita, I want to comment on the point being made that it's in India's own interest not to perhaps resist so much the global negotiating table, but look inwards at what we can do to bring about change. Mr. Saran referred to the recent IPCC report headed by Dr. R.K. Pachauri, the panel, which warns that we are on track to actually exceed the agreed target of limiting carbon emissions to not increase of not beyond 2%, that we're not going to meet that target, and has warned of the disasters which could follow, whether it's on food security, whether it's on natural calamities like the Uttarakhand floods or the Kashmir floods. Are we serious enough domestically, whether it was the UPA government, whether it is the new NDA government? You were on a climate change council, you've just been removed. Do you think we've got the message at home? And when we talk about this whole, really it's about the battle for the poor. The poor, it's a environment versus the poor. Do you think that's a sustainable argument?
No, I think, Sonia, two things if I can put down. One, I think it's very important for India to make sure that it goes to the global negotiations and makes its voice very clear that the China-US deal, for instance, is a very bad deal for the planet. It is neither ambitious, it is not historic. It actually puts a very wrong principle where the two biggest polluters will converge at a per capita emission which is going to be too high for the planet.
12 tons.
So what India has to do is to be much more serious about the issues of equity and about its right to development at the international negotiations. I haven't seen that for some years now. In fact, India has succumbed again and again over the last few years, so that the world today can come together and say that they have a deal which is equitous, which is between the two biggest polluters, but is highly iniquitous for the rest of us. Now that said, I think it's also important for the Indian government not to take cover against using the word equity to do very little at home. It's very important for the Indian government to be much more serious about climate change. As Mr. Saran said, it's in our interest. It is in our interest to make sure that we do not have the kind of calamities we had in Jammu and Kashmir or Uttarakhand, which are a combination of both extreme weather events, extreme rainfall because of climate change, and the complete mismanagement that we are doing of our own environment. We're destroying our water bodies, we're cutting our forests, we're building dams as if there are no tomorrow. So we need to make sure that the government needs to move beyond pretty words and comforting words to actually show that it is serious about climate change also in real policy. And that I'll be very clear, as yet we are not seeing that.
Mr. Sharma, if you could comment on that specific impact, because we talk again and again of food security, we talk of bumper crops, but you've been seeing and you've been researching again on how that's actually being impacted, how our crop cycles are changing. We've seen India's cities, the world's cities are getting much warmer, the monsoon is getting delayed, the threat of severe drought. How does that factor in when we talk of carbon emissions, when we talk of cuts? Somehow we don't translate it literally to food security for the people of our country.
Well, I think let's be very clear that food security for us as well as for the globe is very, very important. You know, nothing can be allowed to play with that food security assurance that we need to have. But having said that, but if you look at the G20 dialogue and the G20 commitments also, you know, it talks of it says very loudly that business as usual should not continue. If you go to the UN and the IPCC also, they also talk about the same, that, you know, we need to have sustainable models so that you can have the food security assured and so on. But actually, it translates into the big business dictating your data for or your systems, food systems everywhere in the world. Now the G20 is saying that the developed countries, read that very carefully, it says the developed countries should be one which would be helping the poor countries or the developing countries to reorganize their agriculture in a manner that, you know, they can meet the food security needs, the livelihood security and so on and so forth. The language is very good, the vocabulary is very good. But behind that, the interest is that the big business of the West will come and tell us how to do agriculture to raise productivity. The entire focus is on raising productivity, as you also mentioned, that we have to meet the challenges of 2050 when the population would be 9 billion plus and so on. But I think we are somehow missing the woods from the trees here. You know, today the world produces food, the total quantity of food is actually double the amount that we require today. You know, we have 7 billion plus people today, and we produce food for 13.5 billion people. There's no food shortage. Where the action should be is on reducing that food wastage. Now, in America, for instance, 40% food is wasted. Now, there's no effort, whether it's G20 or at other forums, to ensure that that food wastage, if it controlled or if it reduced, could be your answer to food security. But everyone is pumping in this fear that, you know, if you don't raise your productivity, you are gone, because there is an industry behind it which tends to gain by that. And also small-scale farmers, we always talk about them, but we have never used their wisdom, never used their traditions to see that, you know, we can bring up a sustainable farming system which also uses renewable systems of farming.
And can battle climate vagaries or the climate changes
for instance, let me explain this. You know, look at the fertilizer, chemical fertilizer. When we talk of you know, renewable sources of energy efficiency and so on, fertilizer alone is one of the biggest polluters as far as agriculture is concerned. But, you know, everywhere in the world we are pushing more fertilizer, more intensive farming. In the name of climate change, we are pushing in more climate, the same model, you know, more of the same is what we are trying to push. So how does it address the real concerns of food security in the days to come, vis-a-vis the population involved in agriculture?
In fact, Mr. Prakash Javadekar, some cynics earlier in the earlier governments used to also talk about the climate change industry, and within governments around the world, there used to be this argument that climate change fears are exaggerated, we're not looking enough at ground realities. But let me ask you, sir, because the NDA government, there is still some confusion on what its stand is on climate change. Prime Minister Modi in his Teachers' Day address when speaking to students had made the point that the climate has not changed, we have changed, our tolerance and habits have changed. So people were a little confused on what he meant on the scientific impact of climate change, or was he referring to it as just more as some, you know, about just a lifestyle change issue. At G20, of course, he's talked much more on the need for clean energy and the science of clean energy. What exactly is the NDA government's stand on climate change? Because there has been worry also about the fast pace your ministry has been setting on environmental clearances for big business. The argument, of course, being that you're reversing what the UPA government had slowed down on. But are we letting environment and environmental concerns be held hostage when we see all these fast clearances being given by our ministry, when we see bodies being changed to bring in this government's nominees and perhaps take out people from previous government, from previous regimes who may not be associated with the government, like Sunita Narayan?
No, let me tell you.
Sunita Narayan's laughing. She didn't ask me to ask that question.
No,
she didn't ask me to ask that.
Prakashi, no problem at all from my side. I'm very happy.
I'll tell you. No, but Sunita Narayan is our good friend and partner also, because next week only we are calling all NGOs also, because we want to build a partnership of government, NGOs and those right-thinking people on international dialogue. Before Lima also we want to build that bridge, and so we'll do that. The issue is this, that as far as climate change is concerned, Narendra Modi and India government is very clear. Narendra Modi is the man who not only wrote the book about greening India and climate change issues, but he added nomenclature climate change to this Ministry of Environment and Forest with a view. He has a commitment. We accept that yes, climate change is real and it is affecting mankind, and we are the sufferers because of anybody's historical wrongdoings. but we will suffer, so we have to adopt, we have to prepare ourselves, and we must also act for clean power, clean air, clean water. So these are the three things which are important. So these are our priorities. So Ganga, Aviral and Nirmal Ganga is the beginning of water and river cleaning. More importantly, we have now introduced the composite air quality index to make country aware about the challenges, and will upgrade make the norms more stringent about the pollution all over. Clean power, as I told, Narendra Modi ji has already declared a very ambitious target. We have already made the cement the biggest polluter industry. More norms are made more stringent, and gen sets and many other industries. In line, we are now taking decisions. You also give publicity to all such good measures we are doing. We are clearing files means what? Sunita Narayan in her beautiful article has said that in the earlier government also, they used to clear ultimately all projects, practically 99% project, but there used to be a delay of 5 to 7 years also. We have reduced that delay, and we are taking decisions with environmental friendly conditions applied to it. And there was no monitoring. We are introducing monitoring and making compliance a major force, because then only you can really care for environment. As just one more point is, panelists referred to J&K floods and Uttarakhand flood. Yes, we have destroyed all the watersheds and all the water flows, natural water flows we have blocked, and there is practically everything in the river bed. So one has suffered the losses. But we have also started doing some good things. This year Koshi floods didn't happen, because we have taken proper operation along with Nepal and did the breaking of the water and making the water flow within the river boundaries itself. So it was not flood. As far as Hudud is concerned, AP and Orissa experienced the preventive measures could avoid a large disaster. So
Yes.
This is a new learning. As far as rivers is concerned, river bed and other things, we are making river like the CRZ, river regulatory. We are thinking of river regulation in a very serious way, and will come out with a full design sooner.
Well, just
We
some
are
of the specific
also
aspects of
into
address, Mr. Javadekar, if I could
afforestation.
just come in on...
No, I'll just afforestation, because this is where we will do. We are into devolution of Campa funds of 33,000 crore rupees
Yes.
as an additionality to the state's regular budget, which will really give a participative social forestry and joint management, which will really boost afforestation, and there are new innovative solutions for degraded forest also. So we will do our own actions for our own sustainable living. And what Prime Minister was saying to the children was that we must also practice the sustainable habits for us, our lives, and not indulge into wasteful production. As Mahatma Gandhi used to say, earth can provide for needs, but not for greed. That's what he was referring to.
That the last government was as responsible for clearing projects, including forest land. It just didn't make it made a song and dance about not clearing them, but they also cleared them.
But I want to ask specifically on some of the points you touched on. You talked about clean air, but it's ironic in a sense, given that all of us are currently sitting in Delhi, which is amongst on some days the most polluted city in the world, beating Beijing. I mean, in any other country, this would be a national emergency, but here it's virtually ignored. Now, you, Prakash Javadekar ji, and I are breathing the same air, but what is being done about just Delhi's air? We've got the tag of being the most polluted city in the world.
Two issues. Let us understand that vehicular population has doubled in 10 years. And we only once, when we introduced CNG, we thought that Delhi has become clean. Once we introduce metro, we think now the problem is over. It doesn't get over. You have to address it on day-to-day basis. Now I studied with the satellite map also and everything, that why there is a smoke in the morning, because I am a morning walker. And the smog is because around Delhi you find all the fire you have to convince, you have to make aware farmers, change their habits and practices, which are not scientific even, but that is causing damage, that is causing smog in a way. If everything you need to tackle item by item on daily basis, and we will doing that with people's participation. At an international level, there are three formulations which we are putting. First, unless Green Climate Fund, which was promised, which has not realized, must realize. And we don't want money only. We want technologies, critical technologies of clean air, clean water and clean power, technologies to be made us freely available. They can give the money to their own companies who have researched on those projects and develop those technologies. They can pay them and they can make these technologies available. That is our first formulation. Second, I raised this in UN climate debate. Who is responsible? Is it producer only or the consumer also? Because consumption also needs to be discussed at that level. And INDCs are intended nationally determined contributions. They are not internationally determined contributions. And therefore, there are many other formulations which we are doing for Lima, and will take on board all sane voices. And I have already interacted with the Climate Council as reformed by the Prime Minister. And I told you, we are discussing with NGOs and we are discussing all those experts who are knowledgeable in environment. Now, next 1 month we will be on that mission only.
Mr. Sarun, coming in specifically on that aspect of pollution, that's an aspect which has been ignored in the last decade, some would say, to reach the levels that it has today. The cost of that pollution, whether it's on health, whether it's on crops, whether it's in deformities in newborn children, is something which is completely ignored by the Indian establishment.
Well, there are two things. One, I think we should look at environment as something somewhat different from climate change. Environmental degradation has to be dealt with whether or not climate change is taking place. What we are seeing is that all the stresses and strains which are generated by rapid economic and social development, and environmental degradation is one of the consequences if you don't deal with it, all those stresses and strains are exacerbated because of climate change. So if you have already environmental degradation taking place, for example, in the Himalayas, if climate change is also coming in as a factor, it will only exacerbate those changes, even multiply those changes. So both these have to go hand in hand. Now, as far as environmental degradation is concerned, we can't hold somebody else responsible. That you have to deal with yourself. And the climate change link comes in because if you don't deal with environmental degradation, the climate change impact will be that much. You will suffer. So I think that's one aspect that we have to look at, that irrespective of what is happening in the international arena, we must have very robust domestic regime to deal with environmental degradation, because that is impacting on us directly and that is our responsibility. As far as the climate change aspect is concerned, there is both a domestic aspect but there is an international aspect. Why is there an international aspect? Because it is a global challenge. That is, even if tomorrow, say, by some miracle, our emissions become zero, we will still be suffering from the impact of climate change if others do not act as we do. So we have to also realize that it is in our interest that in our negotiations, we should be negotiating for a robust climate change regime. So as Sunita said, if you are going to have the two largest polluters converge at 14 tons per capita, that's not a robust climate change regime. Secondly, you must have a very strict compliance regime, because supposing you give your target, you say, I commit myself to reducing my emissions by, say, 25% over the next so many years, by 2030, like the US has said. Supposing the United States of America does not achieve that, and they will have hundreds of arguments. Oh, the Congress said that we could not, we cannot do this, or there is a yes. Or Australia says, sorry, we will have nothing to do with this. So, who is going to hold them accountable?
And
so unless you have a robust climate change regime, you will not be able to hold people responsible for not achieving what they are supposed to. Why was the UNFCCC so important? Because the UNFCCC said science will determine what is required in order to check or in order to prevent climate change from exceeding the levels that we can adapt to. 2 degrees centigrade was held as to be the limit. Now that translates into a certain carbon budget. Once you have determined what that carbon budget should be, then it is only through equitable burden sharing. Burden sharing which is regarded as just by all the countries. Will you be able to achieve that? So the idea was, once science has determined that, then we will engage in multilateral negotiations to decide how do we share that burden.
Divide the slice.
So that is top down. It is not that everybody, what the US has done, and unfortunately we seem to have accepted, is a pledge and review system. Every country puts something on the table and that is subject to review and verification. But then supposing you don't achieve it, what is going to happen? Supposing all these targets which have been put forward voluntarily, they don't add up to what you need for 2 degrees centigrade. And that is exactly what is happening, that most of the promises which are being given and will be given in Paris, my expectation is that it will certainly not add up. So where are we as far as dealing with the issue of climate change is concerned?
Exactly. So Sunita, the international aspect there and also the domestic aspect. Do you want to address both first? Because of course the first question of Mr. Prakash Javadekar is also on the issue of environmental concerns which CSC and other environmental NGOs have come up with. The interesting issue of course on afforestation. Mr. Javadekar, at a time when there is controversy in Maharashtra about forests actually being cut down for an Adani plant. Go ahead, Sunita.
Well, you know, Sonia, I think my position, CSC's position on this has been very clear. We are very clear that the last government was as responsible for clearing projects, including forest land. It just didn't make it made a song and dance about not clearing them, but they also cleared them.
So the reality was the same.
The reality was the same. But what we are saying to this government, and I'm saying it to Mr. Javadekar once again, is that his ministry again is trying to cut down, is trying to undermine and dilute different laws without looking at the whole package which needs to be changed. And the whole package that needs to be changed is to make sure that we are doing enforcement, we are doing monitoring, and we are much more transparent in how we are clearing projects. It cannot be little bits and pieces that are happening today. I think the Ministry of Environment needs to get its act together as far as making sure that our enforcement and monitoring regimes are much stronger.
Absolutely.
And that is an issue that I hope Mr. Javadekar will take seriously. I know that he's saying he will, and my hope is that he will take it seriously in the days to come.
Can we hold development hostage to that? Because that's what some NDA ministers have indicated, Mr. Javadekar, that development is being held hostage to green warriors, as some were saying.
No, I don't believe that, because many green warriors have really, and I'm also one of it, in Sunita's Down to Earth magazine in '92, I closed one unit by public movement, farmers movement, which was not adhering to the pollution norms and was polluting the farms and sending the polluted water to the fields and making them impractical. So in '92 I did that. So what I'm saying is the concerns are real, and I found out that you are putting up impractical conditions and people are accepting that because there was no monitoring. Now what we are doing is putting sustainable conditions but make them work 24 hours. We are now mandating industries to put up 24/7 sensors which will give us the health of the discharge water every moment. If this is what monitoring means, we will do it. And we will do it with the help of technology and with more good reporting plus inspecting systems. Compliance will be the main force.
Let me just take forward, I think the larger issue right now is climate change. And the larger issue here today is the fact that India, if you look at Delhi, Delhi has lost its gains of CNG. And the fact is that we have to take very tough action if you want to reduce pollution now. And the tough action will be on the growing number of vehicles. It will be a second generation reform so that you can enhance public transport. You have to make big changes if you want to reduce pollution in Delhi. And that's the same issue that is at the global level. The fact is the rest of the world is still looking to find small answers to a very large problem of climate change. If you look at emissions of the developed world, they've actually increased and not decreased even in the last 20 years. IPCC has a chart which was very conveniently dropped in the final report, which shows that if you take consumption-based emissions of the rich countries, they've actually increased. And the simple fact is that whether it's the US, whether it's Europe, whether it's Japan, they just exported manufacturing to China. So if you take consumption-based emissions, they've actually increased, which means that they have not reduced. They have not taken the hard steps that are needed to bring down emissions at the global level. Now, the only question that I have for the minister is, if this government is willing to take those hard steps that are needed to do things in India and also push the world to do the hard steps that are needed for the entire world. The time for soft solutions is over. Is that what the minister will agree and do at Lima when he goes next week?
Mr. Javadekar, before that, I'm also going to bring in Mr. Sharma, so then we can do that in the final round of dialogue. But Mr. Sharma, come in on the perspectives we've discussed so far, and also specifically when we talk about pollution, environmental degradation on agriculture and crops. We've seen what's happened to the Himalayan glaciers, has its impact as well on the crops in Himachal Pradesh. We've seen what's happened, pollution on the impact of the output as well. When you look again at the larger solutions we talk about, where do you think the solutions are when it comes to agriculture? We're focusing on manufacturing. Why is there not so much of a focus on agriculture?
Well, first of all, the issue that we are discussing, about the pollution in Delhi and so on, I'm really worried that we might end up copying Beijing, because Beijing on certain days has big screens laid out in the city where they show that sun has risen, and now there is sunset, because you can't see the sun otherwise. So I think that's something which I think we should all be worried about, that we don't want to get into that stage. Now, having said that, your question is very pertinent, and I think the question is very important. Why? Because on one hand we are talking of ensuring that the climate change does not impact the environment and the development, so-called quote-unquote process. But on the other hand, we are following the same systems which actually destroy what we are trying to protect. Agriculture is a classic example. Now, we have coined a term called climate smart agriculture. I admire companies. They always come up with very fanciful, phrases or terms. And you were impressed that's climate smart agriculture, which includes genetically modified crops and also those highly intensive technology to raise productivity.
That's of course a whole separate debate on GM crops. No,
I'm not. I'm just because part of the climate smart. Now, in California and Texas, they are witnessing epic drought for last 3 years. Now there is black marketing of water also happening in California. Such is the severity of the drought there. And GM crops have failed there. Now that's the question that we should not be repeating here, A. Now B, your question is that, what happens to the agriculture farming systems? I was very happy when people start talking about the smog in Punjab and Haryana, which is creating problems in Delhi. After all, at least, thank God, at least because of smog, you realize there is a problem coming up from agriculture there. I think what is more important is to change that farming system, not only to worry about the problem here in Delhi, but to change the farming system, which is doing damage to both as far as the environment is concerned, plus the soil and water. And look at the cancer deaths in Punjab and so on. It has become a hotbed for cancer. So all I'm saying is these are the kind of system which should have changed. But I think more important is, as Sunita said earlier, who is willing to move from cosmetic changes to real hard decisions? I remember Ban Ki-moon said in one of the World Economic Forum, I think it was in 2012, he said that I'm waiting for that man or that leader who can actually radically reform the entire economic system. The basic problem is the present economic growth model, which we don't want to address. Now, I think that is where the crux lies. Now, why I'm saying this is, if you look at not only this economic growth model, but look at even agriculture, the same kind of system of raising GDP, the same kind of system of raising productivity is going on. You're right, it destroys the water bodies, it destroys the soil. Soil is terribly impacted in our country. Now, what is the way forward? Now, interestingly, you will be surprised that Stanford Stanford University recently come out with a very interesting report study in China with the Chinese Agriculture University. They've come out said that China, if it were to stop using these intensive farming systems and go for integrated farming systems, they can produce food equal to what they are producing today till the year 2030 and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30%. Now, the point I'm trying to make is our agriculture is actually causing greenhouse gas emissions or climate change. Why can't we bring in agriculture, radically overhaul the agriculture farming system so that the climate change is controlled right from there rather than, bringing some adaptation technologies later.
To deal with the impact. Mr. Javadekar, the final round of dialogue tonight, two questions. First, Sunita Narayan making the point that are we going to both on the international stage as well as domestically push for real tough hard reform? That's been asked by the other guests on this panel as well. We've seen, of course, the recent WTO. India said it's been a major success for our food security. There have been some interpretations of that. Other political parties have said this is nothing new. This is what America had originally offered. But is Prime Minister Modi, is this government going to push hard now for India in a way isolated, because it's now China has broken away, for India to make its own path forward on climate change, a tough new path? How are you going to balance that with worries? We talk about clean, renewable energy. You mentioned Gujarat. But the fact is that coal is still our major driver. We know this government, with its manufacturing thrust, is going to be looking at coal plants and for our power and gas requirements to mainly come from coal plants. Now, that is, in a sense, the dirtiest fuel of all. How are you going to balance that thrust with climate change and environmental requirements?
First, our energy mix is going for a radical change. Yes, we'll be using all resources of energy because we need to grow and we have to provide access to all. But the issue is, yes, we will be both aggressive on international front in negotiations that the developed world takes its promises and they take up real ambitious targets and follow it up with actions really on ground. And I don't think that China and everything is broken. Today only Martin Khor and his colleagues had met me. We discussed large issues, many other issues, and how we are going ahead up to Lima. Then we will be also doing not only tough negotiations, but our own actions also. As my panelist brother was saying about agriculture, reforming agriculture and many things. Yes, we need to do better sustainable efforts and many hard decisions. But don't worry that science has not stopped evolving, and I am very confident that more and more greener technologies will come, affordable, and India will also contribute some of the technologies. I am always hopeful on that. I don't depend and sit idle. I want to act on my own, our country to act on our own, push the developed world to act their bit, and also encourage development of new greener technologies.
Right, Mr. Javadekar, we'll have to end on that note tonight, but thank you all very much, Shyam Saran, Mr. Sharma and Sunita Narayan and Mr. Prakash Javadekar, sparing the time to talk to us tonight. Thank you.